You are watching 3D animation Mr. Bones, created by me, Sara Rose, for DeVry University's 3D animation with Lab, using Autodesk Maya. If you followed my work, you may be saying, this doesn't look like her original character, Mike, created from a Funko Pop from a popular TV show. No, it doesn't. And that's because around week 5 of 3D animation, I updated Maya and lost my work from part 1 of this class. So I recreated a model and went a different direction, creating Mr. Bones. And this is the process going forward. So even though it says week 2, week 3, week 4, and it's organized the way we were supposed to for the class, really the majority of this entire project I did week 7, 6, 7, and 8. So here goes nothing. In week 2, we were assigned to create joint chains to go along with our geometry. So here we've got the left hand, the center spine, and you can actually see some of the collarbone above that spine. And then on the top right hand side, we see the top and last joint chain in his head. The rest of the joint chains follow the body, and what you can see here differently in this hand is I went ahead and went forward and created the joint chains for all of the fingers, and when you connect them to the wrist, it actually creates those little hand bones right there. So what the joints will do is, tell the body when and how to move like we would normally for a regular body joint. And we have the complete skeleton up above in the top right hand corner. To stay organized with our joints and how they're oriented and parented to each other, there is a naming system and a hierarchy to that naming system, which we organize in what is called as the outliner. So a full view of the outliner at this point in time of my project is shared on the right hand side right here. Week 3, we started working on the IKA handles, which are the inverse kinematics. And forward and inverse kinematics have to do with which way your joints move and how they follow your body, which is another discussion. But here we can see that I have added those to Mr. Bone. Now we started to add the forward kinematics to the hand with the FK handles. And we've started to do so in such a way that the joint will then follow that hand around and also point the right way with pole vectors, which we will also show in the next screen. So in addition to all of those controls on the wrists, which are those squares that you saw, there's pole vector constraints. And what pole vector constraints with their handles as well is which way those joints are going to point. So your knees need to always point forward, not backwards, right? And your elbows traditionally point back. They have some rotation, true, which will allow later as we move along, but they do point backwards, and that allows for this bend to be natural with those pole vector constraints. So for the foot, we ended up creating a reverse foot rig, because if you try moving your foot, it moves both ways. It's I'm not double jointed, but it's not like your elbow. It's going to move backwards, it can move forward. So we're going to give it that reverse joint as well, and a foot roll in that, so that it will move naturally, move forward, move backward, not move too far. And that's what we started to do here. And it was a lot of work. So there's a lot of screenshots of all that work. For the left foot here, what I began doing and starting with was also changing the linear interpolation on the graph editor. And so I did that by changing the line, because when I moved the foot, it wasn't cleanly picking up and being set down. It was a bit of a bell curve in its movement. It would slow down near the ending points of that animation. So I straightened out that line in the graph editor, and you couldn't. It ended up changing and smoothing out the way that it worked. And I repeated all of that work for the right foot and took screenshots of all of it, because at this point you're in the habit of taking screenshots all the time. So I apologize that it doesn't look too different, except that it's from the other side, but with that, it was still its own good set of work. Editing the min-max attribute of the foot allows the foot to only move so far, just like a normal foot naturally would only be able to move so far. And the NURB circle FK handle will allow us to take control of all the work that we just did by only clicking one thing, which is the NURB circle FK handle. So we created each one, would freeze the transformation for each of those. So when we'd hit 0, they would go back to, this normal foot look like you can see in these slides here. And the full rigging we have now completed, and that is the white skeleton that you see down at the bottom. So ta-da, good for us in what would have been done normally in week 3. So now we really want to continue to take control of all the rigging that we've created. So we've continued to create more handles, and here you can see 2 new ones that we've done. The inner circle creates the hips, and primarily for our animation, the rotation of the hips. But we want to make the body move sometimes, and what we're going to do with that was that bigger circle that you see on the outside, which is the outer hip control. But really what that one's hooked to is the base joint in the spine, the joint that we have called the cog control, or the center of gravity. Adding more handles to the completed rigging that we did. Here's 3 more that we've added to the spine. And again, these are the forward kinematics handles, and each of those are connected to a joint in the spine. After adding the FK handles for the shoulders, we can see that in action here. But another thing that we can see happening is the hand is staying still and the arm's just stretching out. And that's not something that a normal character would do, so we've got to fix that. Here we can see that getting fixed, and we have the hand following the shoulders by setting up locators in the joints, and you can see, those set up there. But really what this does is makes that natural look of the hand following the shoulder and not the arm joints and arm bones stretching out. So here we've set up hand spacing with SDKs again, and there's certain points in looking back at this project that I was probably half asleep when I did them, because I'm looking back like, wow, this is great. I'm not sure exactly what you did, but in the end, the goal was to make it look like a human and to make it interact like a bones and character will. But to re-explain this, I'm obviously going to have to get a whole lot better at 3D animation. But really this just allows the hand to move in a more natural motion without getting stuck. But I didn't get mine set up right, because the hand's still facing downward, and really that's probably because of the where the elbow joint is, and if it were moved out instead of being in a straight line, the pole vector would be able to probably have it not rotate. I'm not quite sure why the hand's stuck like that, but that's something that I get to practice and work with later as I move forward. So for the head and neck spacing, what we've continued to work on here was create handles, but we wanted the head to be able to move independent of the body. So if the body moved forward, the head could still look up if it needed to or look around. And so here we've done that, and we've set it up so that when we move things independently, it would be easier for animating. And that's why we're creating all these cons as we're going forward. So we've set the same set driven keys. So this will allow the head to follow the spine as it's supposed to. And some of these animations I got to work really well. They're definitely connected. But there was something about my spine early on that it wasn't wanting to really bend forward. It moved forward at each joint, but really following each other. So again, another something I can work on going forward. And that is why I am lacking in being able to explain exactly what some of this does. But goals. So we were tasked to skin our character, and unfortunately, my character doesn't have skin. Sorry, Mr. Bones. That being said, I was able to take the geometry of the character and parent it to the joints. And so, in doing so, I did that to most of Bones, but then checked it as I went along to make sure that each parenting worked. So after doing the left and right leg, we'll see more of that going forward. But here you can see I did the left and right leg and checked to make sure that it worked. So I continued to work on the Bones character, but with the spine, we want that to actually move around a little bit more as we, to give our character options. But if we were to animate him a lot, in a normal human, your tailbone follows your hips. So we wouldn't want the hips to move and the tailbone to move irrespective of the hips and move separately. So we have what is called weighting, and we would paint separate areas to heavily follow a certain other part of the body. So I did that at the top of the spine and the bottom, the top following the head, of course. And that's how we worked on some of the skin weighting. I continued with the parenting option by taking the geometry and pairing it to the joints and then testing that. And even though I was having some problems with my hand rigging rotating, I was able to parent everything successfully here and practiced with that on the left and right arm. So one of the assignments in the class was to create a shader with reflection blur, specifically trying to create something to look like glass. So I followed the steps here in the bottom screenshot, but I wasn't quite satisfied, and being that there are several options in the newer versions of Maya, I ended up going with an Arnold AI preset, which was glass. And I really liked the reflection that that gave off, even though my room, I was trying to create it darker at that time, but you can see the light reflecting much better off the glass surface and that upper picture on top. I kind of wish I could have kept some of the glare, but that looked more diffused than I wanted it to. So here we have that nice clean look of glass in the upper picture, and that's what I ended up going with. We were tasked with creating a refraction blur, which I attempted, and it shows that in the hypershade Box, I am speaking apprehensively because I didn't really see a difference personally as I worked on the refraction blur, so I can't say that I did it correctly. Some things were in a little different spots than what I was able to look for. Maybe that's not an option in Maya 2018 anymore. You'll have to let me know. But I tried, and that's the result. So then we went on to working on the adjustments of the shaders in the different objects. And really the main props and objects that I have in the scene is this table here with the crystal ball. And I made it look more like wood than what was there before. At current, the finished product at current, I can say it was probably too shiny. The wood, very lacquered looking. But I like the way the crystal ball came out because the original shader made it look like the ball was not as translucent as I liked. And being that we're going to have a little bit of magic going on in the middle of that ball, I ended up going with, again, just making some changes. And the finished look is in the top left-hand corner. So we were tasked with adjusting individual polygons on an object, and I wanted to highlight that by beveling in some of the edge on this table here. And so you can see that inward niche, and then I took those polygons and made them gold, kind of gold inlay on the table as if it were decorated. So I took 2 screenshots here. I hope you can see that. Okay, the table's again a little bit shinier than I ended up sticking with, but there's that gold to indicate an adjustment of single polygons with different shaders. So we continued this adjustment of layering shaders to objects and props in our scene, and I created more of a roughness on the table, and that helped cut down that shine, that sheen, gave it more texture like a wood table would have. But the most impressive look to me was creating a texture and really a porous look to the bone character. So especially looking on the left-hand side of these photos, you can see right there in his nose and his facial area, this looks more like what I would anticipate a bone to look like. And I thought it came out pretty cool. Week 5, we keyed some poses, and as happy as I was with those textured look of the bones, this is really what made it all start to come together. So looking at the top right hand corner, I don't know if you can tell, but I even made the pelvis move in rotation according to the way that the character was walking, and changed the center of gravity over the specific foot that he was walking on, just like humans do. Or bipeds, we're going to go ahead and put our weight on what we're standing on. So I gave him about 4 steps, and here I do not have the hands following his gait yet, but we will work on that in a later scene. So week 5, we started adjusting the graph editor, and in the graph editor, you can see those dots, I'm sure, and those are tangent tools in there which allow us to grab those dots and change them to smooth these hills, these curves, to create different looks that are going to look better according to our animation. So here I practiced in doing some of that. To be fair, I mean, as I'm talking about this, I can still think of the work that I could have shown the differences, because I did a lot of edits to the character before I realized that I should have been taking screenshots. So we move this character around a whole lot to try to create a different gait, and you can work in here as well instead of just the visual scene with your geometry to adjust how your character is going to move. And I did some of those adjustments here. Now when you're done working on a certain character's walk, then, or whatever animation you're going to do, you can repeat in what is called a pre or post infinity cycle. And I added that to my character. Now, my original clips were already pretty crazy, but I must have selected something odd, because In doing so, he doesn't walk normal. I'm sorry, Mr. Bones. I do apologize. Looking at the graph editor down below, you can see it gets pretty crazy after my, so many frames. And this is something I will have to further research. But since my character wigged out around week 5 and I had to recreate, I was limited on time. The fact that I got myself to this point was awesome in my mind. So I did complete the task, but I can't say that it worked perfectly for my specific animation here. Week 6, we worked on lighting, and to be fair, a lot of this lighting I already had done. I use a lot of online tutorials and to practice and render and see if you like how your character is going, then you're gonna have lights in your scene. So I made sure that I did have my key fill and rim lights, which are really your front light on your character, a side light to fix some of the shadow that it's casting, and then a backlight. So I had a ton of that going on already. I did adjust them to make sure that they were a bit more up to standard and fix some different area of lighting. But I had a light emitting object in my crystal ball, and what I did was created a mesh of the object and then placed it back inside. And you can see some of that light reflecting off of the chrome little base that I created for the crystal ball. And we were also tasked to create neon lights. Now, I didn't have a thing I wanted to put neon lights in here, so what I did instead is these words, neon lights, and put them off to the side. Neon lights look a whole lot better in a scene with less ambient light, less direct light, spotlights, etc., like I have set up. So I would recommend those for a darker scene, and it looked great on a dark scene. But we ended up removing those for my animation, but I did complete them for the task as required. To give credit to screenshots that were requested but have not been included for week 6 or the following, and mainly mental rays are missing from Maya. Not missing per se, but with Maya upgrades and updates, they did not include mental rays anymore, so we did not complete those screenshots. But going forward, I found quite a few other instructions and tutorials where I would attempt to follow them, and there would be a step or a tool or a task missing in Maya as well. So I had to then also assume those tasks were changed or are different or things I could not find or what the names were. So these were not completed this week as requested, but were researched as best as I could. I'm sure I was wrong somewhere in there, but to give credit to the request, here they are, and we can go over them at a later time if you need, or maybe you can let me know something new I didn't know. That would be great. Week 7, we began really rendering and double checking different renders to see how our object looks. And so here we had our first test render, and then a render with different settings and a shadow layer. Really hope I was doing things right because things looked the same. I saw slight differences. But I think I would like to practice this on a very simple scene later down the road to really see what these differences were. But here are the tasks as requested. One of the things I was really excited about was the ambient occlusion render for week 7. So what that was, why I was excited about that is because I was under the impression that ambient occlusion no longer existed in Maya. But that being said, I was able, or maybe it doesn't exist for Maya 2020. Maybe that's what it is. But I was able to make it work. So that's the top screenshot that you see here, the video. And then below it, something I failed miserably at was the batch render. And I'm not sure if that was my project, my file, what was it. But every time I would try to render more than one image, Maya shut down. It just closed as if it wasn't open. I'm not sure if it's a problem with my file, with Maya, with my computer, with that download. I'm not sure. But with time on the time of the essence, I could not re-download Maya or start a new project in a few days. So that's something I'm going to have to go back and double check, and maybe there's something in some comments you can leave below and let me know. But I was unable to render more than one image from this file. That's not something I was able to do. Here is the final batch render and image of my completed object, starting to walk, as that's his first little frame there. But yes, this is the culmination of all of my work in 2 photos. It's a bit underwhelming. I was hoping I was going to be able to finish a video, but again, I tried over the course of about 2 days to batch render more than just one image, and Maya just keeps shutting down. I've tried a few things on my computer and system, so I apologize that there will not be a full animation of Mr. Bones as requested and required. I have done my best on that regard and tried to research what was going on, but again, if it just keeps shutting down, we are at our limits here with that. But the learning did take place and the steps were practiced. So thank you for following along on this wonderful project that I have got up to speed. I'm not sure I've ever done a project so fast. So again, my project died at about week 5. So I remodeled a character that was normally required in class 1, and class 2, which was animation. So modeling and then animation. I animated him in the last couple of weeks as well. So pardon the parts that I missed and skipped over that weren't very finessed or fine-tuned, and I will have to go forward and learn those, but I think I did as best as I could have, and really am proud of myself. So here's to finishing my bachelor's and the hurdles that come with completing your goals. Happy 2020.